So that was a lot of talking about use state, but of course, as I said, it is important. But now let's continue and let's make sure that we actually can press that button and we do add this ingredient somewhere. So for that, in the submit handler, I want to submit my data. Now, let's say we're managing our ingredients not in the ingredient form, but in the ingredients.js file, in the ingredients component there. And just because I'm seeing it, here I'm creating that component with the function keyword like this. In ingredient form, I'm creating it like this, storing it in a const, and then by using an arrow function on the right side of the const, it's totally up to you what you want to use. Both creates valid functional components. Both has nothing to do with React hooks. So back in the ingredients function here, which we, just to avoid confusion, could also write like this. In this ingredients function, I have the ingredients form, and here in this functional component, I want to manage my ingredients. I guess that makes a lot of sense because there I will also later output the list of ingredients. So it is a component that has access to both our input and to our output later. So I want to manage the ingredients in there. This of course means that we want to add use state here because our list of ingredients, our array of ingredients, of course, will be some state that should survive re-render cycles that will change over time and where every change should re-render this so that once we do add a list to output our ingredients, well, we can actually see some change there when we add an ingredient. So in the ingredients functional component, I'll again use array destructuring to manage my ingredients and to have a set ingredients function. And in there, with use state, I start with an empty array. Here I use an array because ingredients, of course, will be a list of ingredients, and we will always update that list as a whole when we add an ingredient or when we later delete an ingredient and so on. So we got our ingredients. Now we can also import the ingredient list component from the ingredient list.js file, which I prepared for you. You can just add it here, ingredient list. And ingredient list, this component actually takes a property, ingredient, which is then output. And there, besides the title and the amount, I also want to have an ID. That ID is then used as a key. So in ingredients.js, I want to pass ingredients, this prop, which ingredient list expects, to ingredient list. And the value here will be my ingredients up there. Now, can be confusing because it's always the same name. So maybe we name this up here user ingredients and name this here set user ingredients. You don't have to rename this just because you renamed that, but to really make it clear that these two belong together, I like to have the same names just with a set in front of our updating function here. And now user ingredients is what I pass here to the ingredients prop. So I hope this is clear which ingredients is what. That's the prop of the ingredient list. So we're passing this in here. Now the ingredient form should be able to add a new ingredient. So let's define a function here in the ingredients functional component, add ingredient or add ingredient handler maybe. And that's a function which will ultimately receive a new ingredient here, which should store this in our ingredients array. So here the idea will be to call set user ingredients. And now important, we'll need to update the existing list of ingredients and add a new one. Now that means we depend on the current state, and therefore it's best if we use the function form where we're guaranteed to get the latest state. So we get our previous ingredients here, our old array basically, the current state, the most recent state of this list here, and we return a new array where I use all previous ingredients. This is a spread operator taking all elements of our old array and adding them as elements to this new array, which I'm constructing with the square brackets. And then I add one new element here, and that's the ingredient we're getting. Now important, the ingredient we're getting from the ingredient form will have a title and an amount, but probably not an ID because the ID should be somehow auto-generated. Now I'll later use a web server which does this for us. For now, let's create a new object here with an ID, which for now can just be moth random to string. And that's not truly a unique ID, but unique enough for our cases here. It's a good dummy ID. And then I, of course, want to keep my title and my amount. from ingredient. And we can again use the spread operator on ingredient now. So on this argument we're getting, because this argument will be an object, let's say, the spread operator then takes all key value pairs from that object and adds them as key value pairs to this new object. So now we're adding a new object with an ID, title, and amount to our list of ingredients here. That's the add ingredient handler. Now we need to pass a pointer at that add ingredient handler to the ingredient form, because that is where we want to trigger the addition of an ingredient, right? Because that's where we have our button that, well, submits this form. This button is of type submit, therefore it triggers the on submit here and the submit handler. And in here, I now want to, well, call something which I'm getting from the ingredients component. So let's say we pass in a prop which could be named on add ingredient, and the name is totally up to you. And there we point at the add ingredient handler. So this is how you pass function references down to components, right? You learned that throughout the course. Hasn't changed, has nothing to do with React hooks. So now we'll have an on add ingredient prop in the ingredient form, and that will have a pointer at this function. So in the ingredient form, in the submit handler, we can call props on add ingredient as a function, because again, this will hold a pointer at that function in the ingredients.js file. And there I will pass in an object, because here I expect to get ingredient as an object. I pass in an object which has a title and amount. So here, title is my entered title, and amount is my entered amount. Just like that. So this is getting sent to the add ingredient handler. This will add a new ingredient and update our ingredients array. And we're passing this ingredients array to the ingredient list. So now our hope would be to see changes in that list when we add an ingredient. So here's our ingredient list. Now let's add 5 apples, and we're getting an error. Now this error is coming from the ingredient list. There I'm registering a click on the ingredients to bind to on remove item. That is something we'll need later to remove ingredients. So for now, let's simply go to the ingredient list component we're using in the ingredients component and pass the on remove list prop in there. And this should point at a function which for now simply doesn't do anything, just so that the ingredient list does receive a function and bind therefore does work. So with that, let's try this again. Let's add 5 apples, and here they are. Now clicking on them doesn't do anything for now, but we can now add our ingredients.